The cardboard boxes were breeding. I'd hauled 6 of them up 3 flights of stairs, and now there were at least a dozen squatting in the middle of the living room floor, their taped mouths grinning. The air was thick, with the smell of dust and old paper, and the faint, sweet scent of decay that clings to buildings where too many people have lived and left too quickly. I ripped the tape off another one, the sound harsh in the quiet apartment. Books. Not mine. They must have belonged to the last tenant. I grunted, hefting the box to a corner. My future was a pile of someone else's unwanted things. I worked with a dull, methodical anger, tearing open boxes, sorting junk, creating piles. This was my fresh start. A third-floor walk-up that smelled like a wet dog, with water stains on the ceiling that looked like faded maps of forgotten countries. It was all I could afford. I just needed to get my head straight. Get some distance. I reached for the last box in the center of the room. This one felt lighter. More books. I pulled them out one by one, dropping them onto a growing stack. Textbooks, old paperbacks with cracked spines, a dictionary. Near the bottom, something slipped from between the pages of a thick history book and fluttered to the floor. A photograph. I picked it up. The gloss was worn, the corners soft. It was a picture of a car accident, a bad one. A sedan, its front end crumpled like a fist, was wrapped around a telephone pole. The driver's side door was bent open at a terrible angle. The image was grainy, black and white, but the dark stain spreading on the asphalt was unmistakable. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't want this. I didn't need to see this. I was about to shove it back into the box when I heard it. It hurts. The voice was tiny, a wisp of sound, like a radio playing in a distant room, a little girl's voice. I froze, the photograph still pinched between my thumb and forefinger. My head snapped up. I stared at the closed apartment door. I scanned the single window, its grime-streaked glass showing only the brick wall of the building next door. I held my breath, straining my ears. Nothing. Just the low hum of the ancient refrigerator from the kitchen alcove and the distant murmur of traffic from the street below. My heart was kicking against my ribs. I let out a slow breath. Just tired, I mumbled to the empty room. Nerves. The words felt hollow, a weak shield against the silence that had just been broken. Strain. That's all it was. The move, the lack of sleep, the stress of it all. The mind plays tricks. I tossed the photograph back into the box, on top of the books. I didn't want to look at it again. I taped the box shut, the sound of the ripping tape unnaturally loud, and shoved it into a closet with the others. Out of sight. The sweat on my skin had turned cold. I left the mess of boxes and went to the bathroom, needing to feel the shock of cold water on my face. The room was a small, tiled box. The porcelain of the sink was spiderwebbed with fine cracks. The faucet dripped with a slow, maddening rhythm. One drop. A long pause. Another drop. I twisted the chrome handle, the metal squeaking in protest, and leaned over the basin. I splashed my face again and again, the water sharp and cold, trying to wash away the feeling that had settled over me, the feeling of not being alone. I straightened up, reaching for the towel someone had left hanging on a hook. My reflection was a blur in the mirror, clouded with the steam from the hot water pipes I hadn't even used. I wiped at the glass with the heel of my hand, clearing a small circle, and I saw it. It wasn't my reflection. To the side of the space I had cleared, perfectly preserved in the thin film of condensation, was a handprint. It was small, impossibly small. The fingers were short and slender, the palm a delicate smear on the glass. A child's handprint. It was placed low on the mirror, about level with my chest. It could not be mine. My heart, which had just started to settle, gave a hard, painful jolt. I stared. It was so clear, so definite. I could see the whorls of a tiny fingerprint in the palm. I stood, motionless, the dripping faucet counting out a slow, heavy beat in the silence. Drip. Drip. My first thought was a desperate, grasping one, the people before. A family with a kid. It was an old print, revealed by the steam. That had to be it. It was a logical explanation, but the whisper echoed in my memory. The two things connected with a snap, a clean, terrifying circuit of fear. The voice that hurt. The small hand. My hand moved on its own, fast and jerky. I took the towel and wiped the entire mirror, scrubbing at the glass until the ghostly image was gone, leaving only frantic, wet streaks. But I couldn't erase it from my mind. I saw it behind my eyes, a small hand, reaching out from a place I couldn't see. I backed out of the bathroom, leaving the faucet to drip in the dark. Sleep. I just needed sleep. Tomorrow, in the daylight, this would all seem foolish. The strain of moving. An old handprint. the strange acoustics of an old building. I would have an explanation for all of it. I didn't bother with the boxes. I walked into the empty bedroom, threw my duffel bag on the floor, and pulled out a sleeping bag. I didn't even have a bed yet. I zipped myself in, the nylon cool against my skin. The floor was hard beneath me. I closed my eyes, forcing my mind to go blank. I focused on the sound of my own breathing, willing the world to disappear. The dream came on fast and hard. I was driving. Rain lashed against the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle. The road was a slick, black ribbon disappearing into the night. My hands were gripping the wheel, knuckles white. I recognized the gnawing dread in my gut. I had had stress dreams about car trouble before, but this was different. The fear was sharper, more immediate. Then I saw her. A shape in the headlights. A small girl standing in the middle of my lane. I stomped on the brake. The tires screamed. The world became a wrenching, metal-on-metal shriek, and then a final sickening crunch as the car slammed into a pole. The same pole from the photograph. In the dream, the silence that followed was absolute. The rain had stopped. The engine was dead. I was unhurt. I pushed the door open, the metal groaning, and stepped out onto the wet asphalt. I looked for the girl, my stomach churning with a guilt that felt ancient and deep. But the space in front of the car was empty. There was no one there. I scanned the dark tree line at the edge of the road, and I saw her. She was standing at the end of the road, just a silhouette against the gloom. She was looking at me. I couldn't see her face, but I felt her eyes on me. The air turned sharp. It bit at my skin, a deep penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the rain, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. She started to walk toward me. Her movements were slow, deliberate. With every small step she took, a crack appeared on the asphalt, branching out from her foot like black lightning. She was close enough now that I could hear her, the same tiny whisper from the apartment, but now it was perfectly clear, as if she were speaking right beside my ear. "You left me there." I tried to scream. My mouth opened, my lungs heaved, but no sound came out. A raw, silent terror seized my muscles. I was paralyzed, watching the small figure and the cracked earth approaching. My body finally broke free. I didn't think, I just turned and ran. I scrambled off the road, plunging into the dark woods that bordered it. Branches whipped at my face, clawing at my clothes. Wet leaves slapped against my skin. My breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. I ran without looking back, the only sound, the pounding of my own heart, and the frantic crash of my feet through the undergrowth. I had to hide. I saw a large oak tree, its trunk a thick blot of darkness, and threw myself behind it. I pressed my back against the rough bark, sinking down onto the damp earth. I held my breath, listening. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. Then, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound. Tap. Scrape. Tap. The sound of small feet, dragging slightly, on the carpet of dead leaves. It was slow, unhurried, getting closer. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look. Don't make a sound. The bark of the tree dug into my spine. I could feel the coldness intensifying, a tangible presence pooling in the air around me. It felt like standing in front of an open freezer. The footsteps were so close now, I could hear the delicate crunch of each individual leaf. Tap, scrape, tap. They stopped, right behind the tree, right behind me. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I could feel the cold on the back of my neck, a breath away. I stayed there, coiled like a spring, every muscle screaming, waiting for a hand to fall on my shoulder. I woke up with a violent jerk, my whole body flailing. I was in the sleeping bag, on the hard floor of the empty bedroom. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. The room was still. The only light was the faint orange glow of a streetlight filtering through the dirty window. I lay there, gasping for air, the dream's terror slowly receding. Mohoidamdia, a cold film on my skin. I sat up, the nylon of the sleeping bag rustling loudly in the quiet. It was just a dream, a nightmare, brought on by a creepy photo and an old house. That's all. I ran a shaky hand through my wet hair, a wave of relief washing over me. It wasn't real. I brought my hand up to wipe the sweat from my face. As my right forearm passed in front of my eyes, a sharp sting made me flinch. I stopped, my hand hovering in the dim light. I looked down. There, on the pale skin of my forearm, were 3 lines. They were parallel, perfectly spaced. They were a raw, angry red against my skin. The lines weren't just red marks. The skin was broken, raised, and inflamed. Along the length of each scratch, tiny, dark beads of blood were welling up, gleaming faintly in the orange light. They were not there when I went to sleep. I stared at them, my breath caught in my throat. The relief I'd felt moments before vanished, replaced by a cold, solid certainty. It wasn't a dream. Not all of it. Work was a grid. Numbers in boxes. Formulas connecting them. The hum of the overhead fluorescence was a flat, constant note. I stared at the screen, at a column of figures that refused to add up. The numbers swam, losing their edges. My focus was a frayed rope. The 3 red lines on my forearm burned under my shirt cuff. I kept pulling the sleeve down, a nervous twitch I couldn't stop. Every time my skin brushed the fabric, the sting was a small, sharp reminder. It wasn't a dream. The cursor blinked. Click. Type. Delete. My hands felt clumsy, disconnected from my brain. All I could see behind my eyes was the dark smear of a handprint on a steamed-up mirror. The air in the office was recycled and cool, but a film of sweat coated my neck. I needed this job. I needed the routine. I needed to sit in this chair from 9 to 5 and pretend last night didn't happen. Pretend the apartment wasn't waiting for me, holding its breath. An icon flashed in the corner of my screen. A new email. I clicked it open without thinking. The sender was a string of random letters and numbers. The subject line was 2 words in all caps. Remember? My finger hovered over the delete key. Spam. Just another piece of digital garbage. But my eyes dropped to the body of the message. It was empty. Except for a single small character at the very bottom. Colon, opening parenthesis dot. A cold spike drove itself into the base of my skull. It was nothing. A coincidence. A bot that scrapes keywords and sends out tailored junk mail. That's all. I slammed my finger down on the mouse button. The email vanished. Gone. I stared at the empty space where it had been. My heart was a fast, hard drum against my ribs. I took a slow breath. The recycled air tasted stale. It's nothing. I went back to the spreadsheet. The numbers were just shapes on a screen. The walk home was a blur of concrete and exhaust fumes. I kept my head down, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. Every person I passed felt like a potential threat. A man waiting for the bus, his eyes fixed on me for a second too long. A woman pushing a stroller, a look on her face I couldn't read. I felt watched. The feeling was a physical weight on my shoulders, pressing me down. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my footsteps loud in the stairwell. I fumbled with the key, my hand shaking slightly. It took 2 tries to get it in the lock. The door swung open into silence. The cardboard boxes were still piled where I'd left them. The air was thick, with the same smell of dust and old memories. Nothing had changed. Everything was exactly as I had left it. A wave of relief, thin and weak, washed over me. I was just tired. Stressed. The scratches were from me. In my sleep. The email was spam. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clatter echoing in the quiet. I needed a beer. Something to dull the edges. I walked to the kitchen alcove and pulled the refrigerator door open. The weak interior light flickered on. Milk. A shriveled lemon. A bottle of water. And a drawing. It was taped to the inside of the door. A piece of plain white paper, torn from a notepad. It was a child's drawing, done in thick, waxy strokes of black crayon. A car, boxy and crude, was smashed against a pole. One side of the car was a furious scribble of black smoke lines rising from it. On the ground next to the car was a stick figure, lying flat on its back. The figure had X's for eyes. Above the entire scene, drawn in the sky, was a face, 2 dots for eyes, and a downward curving line for a mouth, colon opening parenthesis dot. The same sad face from the email. My blood went cold. It felt like ice water was being pumped through my veins. I stood motionless, the cold air from the fridge washing over me. The low hum of the compressor was the only sound. It was not there this morning. I was certain. I had gotten a bottle of water before I left for work. The door was white. Empty. I would have seen it. I would have remembered. My hand moved, fast and jerky. I snatched the drawing from the door. The paper was cool and slightly slick from the condensation. I stared at the crude lines, at the childish depiction of wreckage and death. It felt heavy in my hand. Impossibly heavy. Who? The relief I'd felt moments before shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't in my head. Someone had been in my apartment. I slammed the refrigerator door shut. The bottle of water inside rattled. Panic clawed up my throat. I crumpled the drawing in my fist, the waxy paper protesting with a crackling sound. I ran to the front door. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was secured in its track. I had locked it myself. I remembered the distinct click of the bolt sliding home. I lunged for the window in the living room. It was an old sash window, painted shut years ago, but I rattled it anyway. It didn't budge. The security lock was still in place. The fire escape window in the bedroom. I scrambled over a pile of boxes to get to it. The metal clasp was rusted but firm. Locked. Every point of entry was sealed. From the inside, I stood in the middle of the living room, my chest heaving. My mind raced, trying to find a logical path, a rational explanation. A spare key? The landlord? No. It made no sense. Why would they do this? Why this drawing? Tabraze. My gaze fell on the television. It was an old, bulky CRT model left by the previous tenant, a black, dusty box sitting on the floor. As I stared at it, the screen flickered to life. A wash of gray and white static hissed, filling the room with a sound like a million whispers. I took a step back, my balled fist still clutching the drawing. The static cleared. An image resolved. It was a news broadcast. The quality was poor, the colors faded. A news anchor with dated hair and a wide lapel blazer was speaking. I couldn't hear the words at first, just the tinny, distorted sound coming from the single speaker. Then the image cut to B-roll footage. A night scene, flashing red and blue lights painting the trees. The mangled wreckage of a sedan wrapped around a telephone pole. The pole. The sedan. My car. The news anchor's voice became clear, a detached professional tone layered over the images of my past. A single vehicle accident on Route 9 late last night has left one person dead. Authorities have identified the victim as... No, I whispered. The word came out as a dry croak. The camera zoomed in on the driver's side door, bent open at a sickening angle. It lingered for a moment on the dark stains spreading on the wet asphalt below. The driver, who walked away with minor injuries, is not being named at this time, but police say charges are pending. Shut up! The yell tore from my lungs, raw and desperate. I lunged across the room, my body acting on pure instinct. I didn't reach for a button. I grabbed the thick power cord where it met the wall and ripped it from the socket. The screen went black. The voice cut out. The silence that rushed back in was profound. I stood there, panting, my knuckles white where I gripped the plug. My own breathing was loud in my ears. The crumpled drawing was still in my other hand, a sweaty, waxy lump. It was in that sudden, heavy silence that I heard it. My phone. It was ringing. The generic, jarring ringtone cut through the quiet. I had left it on the kitchen counter next to my keys. For a second, I just stared at the counter. The phone vibrated, its buzzing a frantic counterpoint to the ringtone. My feet moved on their own. I walked to the counter, my legs feeling stiff and wooden. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. My thumb hovered over the green icon. My whole body was screaming at me not to answer. To let it ring. To throw it out the window. But I had to know, I had to hear the voice of the person who was doing this. I slid my thumb across the screen. I put the phone to my ear. My hand was trembling. Hello? My voice was tight. Silence. I could hear nothing but a faint electronic hiss. Who is this? I demanded, trying to sound angry, but it came out as a plea. Then, a voice spoke. It wasn't a child. It wasn't a news anchor. It was a whisper, dry and close, as if the person was speaking directly into my ear. It was a voice I recognized better than any other in the world. It was my own. Distorted, pitched down, dragged through some digital filter that made it sound monstrous, but it was unmistakably mine. You can't run, my own voice whispered back at me. Your guilt is right here. A pure, animal terror I had never known seized me. It was not a thought. It was a physical reaction, A surge of revulsion and fear so powerful it made me gag. I screamed, a wordless sound of horror, and threw the phone away from me as if it were on fire. It hit the far wall with a sharp crack of plastic and glass, then clattered to the floor in a heap of broken components. The back cover and battery skittered in opposite directions. I staggered back, my hand pressed to my mouth, and slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. I stared at the wreckage of my phone. I pulled my knees to my chest, my whole body shaking. The room was quiet again. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I stayed like that for a long time, just breathing, trying to push down the wave of sickness that churned in my stomach. It was over. The phone was broken. The TV was unplugged. I was alone. Then, from the corner of the room, a sound. A faint crackling noise from the shattered speaker of the phone. I froze, my eyes wide, fixed on the broken plastic. One last sentence came out, warped and gargantuan, a final, dying gasp of electricity. My own voice, twisted into something foul, speaking a final truth. It's inside you. And then, silence. The whiskey burned a trail down my throat, a cheap fire that did nothing to warm the ice in my gut. I sat at the small kitchen table, the bottle in front of me, the glass in my hand. The clock on the microwave showed 3:17 a.m. Sleep was a foreign country I'd been exiled from. I tipped the bottle again. The amber liquid sloshed into the glass. My hand was steady. That felt like a small victory. It was the stress. It had to be. The new job, the move to this city, where the walls felt too close and the silence between buildings was too loud. The constant, grinding memory of twisted metal and flashing lights. My mind was playing tricks, connecting dots that weren't there. Spam email. A prank. A faulty television wiring itself into my nightmares. I'd smashed my phone against a wall. That was real. The shards of plastic and glass were still swept into a pile by the baseboard. A monument to my own breakdown. The explanation was simple. I was cracking. The pressure was finding the seams in my composure and splitting them open. I finished the glass and stood up, the chair scraping against the linoleum. The room tilted for a second. Too much. Too fast. I needed a shower. Wash it all off. I left the bottle on the table. My keys were next to it, a small heap of metal glinting under the pale kitchen light. I walked into the bathroom and twisted the faucet. Steam billowed, fogging the mirror, and for a blessed moment the world was reduced to hot water and white noise. I stood under the spray until my skin was red, trying to scald the shaking out of my muscles. When I stepped out, wrapped in a towel, the apartment was quiet. The fog on the bathroom mirror was already receding, revealing nothing but my own pale face. Back in the kitchen, I reached for my keys on the table to move them before I went to bed. My hand closed on empty air. I blinked, my fingers brushing the cool wood surface. They weren't there. I looked around the tabletop, then on the floor underneath. Nothing. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I turned, my eyes scanning the small apartment. And I saw them, hanging from the small brass hook next to the front door. The place they were supposed to be. The place I never put them. I always dropped them on the table. Always. I walked over, my bare feet cold on the floor. I stared at the keys. They hung perfectly still. I must have done it. I must have walked in, hung them up on my way to the kitchen, and the stress, the alcohol, had just wiped the memory clean. I must have. My mind was a sieve. Confused. That's all. I was just confused. I pulled the keys from the hook and held them tight in my fist, the metal teeth digging into my palm. I didn't go to bed. I sat on the sofa, the keys still in my hand, and waited for the sun to come up. The knock on the door came just after 8. It was a firm, impatient rapping that made my head throb. I got up, my joints stiff, and looked through the peephole. A distorted image of Mrs. Gable from 2B, her gray hair in a tight bun, her face pinched with disapproval. I undid the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches. "Liam," she said, her voice a sharp instrument, "I'm sorry to bother you, but we need to talk." "Mrs. Gable." "Is something wrong?" "Yes, something is wrong." She pulled her floral housecoat tighter around herself. "I am not one to complain, you know this. But this is the second night now. I need my rest. I stared at her. The second night of what? The noise, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The running. Back and forth. Back and forth. Little footsteps, all hours of the night. And the crying. Good Lord, that poor child sounds so unhappy. It breaks my heart, but it's keeping me awake. The air in my lungs turned to stone. Child? Yes, your niece? Granddaughter? I don't want to pry into your family business, but last night was the worst yet. It wasn't just the running. There was a scratching sound. On the wall, the one that connects to my bedroom, for almost an hour. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like a little animal. You need to get that poor thing some toys, Liam. It's not right to let a child be that distressed. My mouth was dry. I couldn't form words. I live alone. I have no family here. No one has been in this apartment but me, but her face was certain. Her complaint was real. She had heard it. She was giving me an alibi for my own horror. Proof that something was here when I was passed out on the sofa. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gable, I managed to push out. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Her expression softened slightly. Thank you, dear. I knew you'd understand. She gave a curt nod and turned, shuffling back toward her own apartment. I closed the door slowly, the click of the latch echoing in the hallway. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. It wasn't me. It wasn't my mind. It was real. The apartment was no longer my home. It was a cage. A trap set by something I couldn't see. The windows weren't for light. They were for being watched. The door wasn't for entry. It was for keeping me in. I couldn't stay here. But where could I go? A hotel? What would I tell them at the front desk? That I was being haunted by phantom children? Eepy moo. Alex. I had to call Alex. My one friend in this city. The one person who might not think I was completely losing my mind. I'd bought a cheap burner phone yesterday. A flip phone with a prepaid card. It was on the kitchen counter. I snatched it, my hands fumbling as I flipped it open. My thumb punched in his number, the plastic keys clicking loudly in the silence. I put the phone to my ear, listening to the electronic burr of the ringing tone. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then a click. The call connected. Alex? I said, my voice tight. There was no answer. Just a faint, tinny sound. A melody. It was a lullaby, thin and distorted, like it was being played on an old, broken music box from miles away. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Alex, can you hear me? Alex, what is this? I shouted into the phone, my panic rising like bile. The lullaby didn't stop. It continued its delicate, horrifying little tune, a needle of ice tracing a pattern on my spine. It was the only sound on the line. Cold. Mechanical. Indifferent to my screams. Alex! The lullaby played its final note, and then the line went dead. A single, sharp click, followed by the profound hum of disconnection. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the phone clenched in my hand. It knew. Whatever this thing was, it could get inside the walls, it could get on the news, it could get inside my phone calls. It was severing every line to the outside world, isolating me, tying me down in this room. And that's when I heard it. From the bedroom. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The exact sound Mrs. Gable had described. A dry, scraping noise against wood. My blood went cold. It was happening now. In broad daylight. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tightening. The phone slipped from my sweaty hand and clattered onto the floor. I didn't notice. My entire being was focused on the bedroom door, which was closed. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was rhythmic, insistent. I took one slow step, then another. The floorboards under my feet were silent. I moved like a ghost in my own home, inching my way toward the sound. I reached the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed my ear against the cheap hollow wood. The scratching was louder now, right on the other side. A small animal, she'd said. It sounded like fingernails. Long fingernails, digging into the paint, scraping away the wood underneath. I listened, my own breathing silenced by fear. Then, it stopped. The silence that followed was immense, a vacuum that sucked the air from my lungs. I waited. Nothing. Not a breath, not a movement. Click. It was a small sound, a quiet sound. But it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard in my life. It was the sound of the lock on the bedroom door. A simple turn button lock on the inside knob, being disengaged. It had just been unlocked. From the inside, my body reacted before my mind could. I scrambled backwards, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the floor of the hallway. I crab walked away, my eyes locked on the doorknob. It wasn't turning. The door began to move on its own. It opened inward with a low, drawn-out creak, the sound of old hinges protesting. It opened an inch, then two. A dark vertical slice appeared in the frame. I pressed myself against the far wall, my throat working but no sound coming out. I was waiting for something to rush out. A shape. A person. A monster. The door stopped moving. Left ajar by about a foot. Nothing came out. The silence returned. I stayed there, on the floor, shaking, for a full minute. Then another. Still nothing. The silence was the bait. The open door was the invitation. I had to know. I couldn't live in this apartment for one more second, not knowing what was in that room. Slowly, using the wall for support, I pulled myself to my feet. My legs felt like they were made of sand. I took a hesitant step toward the open door, my body screaming at me to run, to smash a window, to just get out. But I kept moving. I reached the doorway and peered around the edge, my heart hammering. The bedroom was the same as I had left it. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled. A pile of clothes was slung over a chair. Sunlight streamed through the single window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was empty. There was nothing there. A wave of dizzying confusion washed over me. Was it the wind? A draft? Had I just imagined the lock? My eyes swept the room again, looking for anything out of place, and then I saw it. On the wall, directly above the headboard of my bed. Writing. The letters were crude, jagged, written in something dark red that was still wet enough to drip in thin rivulets down the pale paint. It looked like a child had finger-painted a message in rage. It stretched across the wall, a raw, bleeding wound in the center of my room. It asked a simple question. Why didn't you die with me? The air in the motel room was thick with the smell of old cigarette smoke and pine-scented cleaner. A lie. It was a cheap room in a place called the Starlight Inn, but the only star was the broken red neon one that buzzed outside my window, casting a sick pulse across the stained brown carpet. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, the mattress coils digging into the backs of my thighs. The phone was hot against my ear. "I'm not crazy, Alex," I said. The words tasted metallic. "Liam, listen to yourself." Alex's voice came through the line, tired and thin. "You've been drinking. You're stressed out of your mind. You smashed your phone. Now you're talking about writing on the walls and phantom kids. It's the guilt eating you. It's always been the guilt." "Mrs. Gable heard it," I insisted. "She heard a kid. She heard scratching. She's a half-deaf old woman who probably heard a raccoon in the wall. You need sleep, man. Real sleep. Not the kind you get from a bottle." I squeezed my eyes shut. He was using reason. Reason felt like a weapon pointed at me. A television bolted to the dresser across the room flickered to life. The screen was bright blue. A cartoon castle appeared, followed by a sweep of sparkling pixie dust. The cheerful, saccharine theme music of the Disney Channel filled the small room. I flinched, my eyes snapping open. "What was that?" Alex asked. "What's that music?" "The TV just turned on," I said, my voice low. I looked at the remote on the nightstand. It was untouched. "See? Liam, motels have shitty wiring. The remote is probably busted. Just unplug it and go to sleep. Please, for me." I didn't answer. I reached over, my hand shaking, and jabbed the power button on the remote. The screen went black. The music stopped. "It's the wiring," I said, more to myself than to him. "Faulty system." A long sigh on the other end of the line. "Okay, look, I'll come over in the morning. Not tonight. I'll get a few hours sleep, I'll pick up some coffee, and I'll come to this Starlight Inn. We'll figure it out. Okay? Just lock your door and try to rest." The promise of morning was like a hand pulling me back from a ledge. "Yeah, okay, morning. Promise me you won't drink any more tonight?" "I promise." The lie was easy. My throat was already dry. "Good. I'll see you tomorrow." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed for a second before I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. But there was a sliver of light now. Alex was coming. Morning would come. I just had to get through the next few hours. I stood up and walked to the door, checking the deadbolt. It was thrown. I pushed on the door. Solid. I checked the flimsy chain lock and slid it into place. I was a prisoner, but at least I had bolted my own cell. I turned back to the room. My duffel bag was on the floor, a lump of shadow. The red neon pulsed. On. Off. On. Off. I was tired. My bones ached with a fatigue that sleep couldn't fix. But Alex was right. I needed to try. The phone on the bed vibrated against the cheap comforter, a harsh, buzzing sound that made my heart jump into my throat. I looked at the screen. It was Alex. The name glowed white. Why was he calling back? Did he forget something? I swiped to answer, a wave of relief washing over me. Maybe he'd changed his mind and was coming now. Alex? I said, my voice softer. A bit of an apology in the tone. Silence. Not even the hiss of an open line. Just dead air. Hello? I said, louder this time. Then, a voice. It was Alex's voice, but it was wrong. It was flat. Empty of warmth. A perfect digital copy with no soul inside. You think you can run? The blood in my veins turned to ice water. I couldn't speak. I could only listen. I know what you did, the voice continued, still in that dead, perfect imitation of my friend. The rain was so heavy that night. You couldn't see the road clearly. You'd had 3 beers at that little bar off the highway. Just 3. Not enough to be drunk, but enough to be slow. Enough to make you turn the wheel a half second too late. The light was red, Liam. You told the cops it was green, but it was red. I saw it. The little girl in the back seat of the other car, she was wearing a yellow raincoat. Do you remember that? A little yellow raincoat. My knees gave out. I sank onto the carpet, the phone clenched in my fist against my ear. These were details. The details I had buried. The details I had lied about. The details that only I knew. Who is this? I whispered, my own voice a stranger. What do you want? The only answer was a soft, cruel chuckle, still in Alex's voice. Then the voice changed. It wasn't a sudden shift. It was a fluid, horrifying bleed from one sound into another. It morphed, the pitch rising, the cadence softening, becoming achingly familiar. It became my mother's voice. Kua. I recoiled as if struck. No one had called me that in years, not since. Kua, Salkon Li Lamdi? The voice wept. It was her. It was her sound. The exact way her voice broke when she was in pain. The sound that had haunted my sleep for a decade. Why did you do it, son? Kunda git konbe. Kunda git. Konbe do. You killed her. You killed that little girl. Stop it, I yelled, scrambling backwards, my back hitting the base of the bed. Leave me alone. WHO. Are you? The voice was relentless, a surgeon's tool digging into the most sensitive parts of my memory. It knew everything. It knew my birth name. It knew my parents' voices. It was using my own life against me, turning my past into a weapon. I didn't mean to. I screamed into the phone, tears of rage and terror burning my eyes. It was an accident. The crying stopped instantly. The silence was abrupt. Violent. For a second, I thought the call had ended. Then, a new voice spoke. It was small. Tiny. The voice of a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, and it was as cold as a morgue slab. Then, come to me. A loud thump came from outside my door, like a heavy boot, kicking a metal box. The red neon sign outside the window died. The lamp on the nightstand went out. The entire room was plunged into an abyssal, total darkness. The phone line went dead in my hand, its screen the only source of light. My breath hitched in my chest. I couldn't hear anything. Not the hum of the ice machine down the hall. Not the traffic on the distant highway. The power was out. He had cut the power. He was here. In the suffocating dark, I heard a sound inside the room with me. It was a slow, deliberate creak. The sound of old, unoiled hinges. The closet door. It was opening. My mind went white with panic. I fumbled with the phone, my thumbs swiping desperately at the screen, trying to find the flashlight icon. My fingers slipped on the glass. I tried again. A bright, white beam shot out from the back of the phone, cutting a frantic path through the darkness. I aimed it at the closet. My hand was shaking violently, making the beam of light dance and jump. The closet door was ajar, a black slit against the pale wood. The shaking made it look like something was moving just inside the shadows. I held my breath, forcing my hand to steady. The beam stilled. I pointed it directly into the opening. The closet was shallow. A few wire hangers hung from a metal rod. The back wall was bare. There was nothing inside. A choked sob of relief escaped my throat. My body went limp, the tension draining out of me in a rush that left me weak. It was a trick. All of it. A sick, elaborate trick with a recording and a flipped breaker switch. I let my head fall back against the bed, laughing a little. A high, unhinged sound. I started to lower the phone. My arm was heavy, exhausted. The beam of light dropped from the closet, sweeping down the wall. It passed over the cheap wood-framed mirror bolted to the wall next to the dresser. For just one fraction of a second, the light illuminated the glass. And I saw the reflection. It wasn't me. The face in the mirror was mine. Same tired eyes, same jawline, same messy hair. But the mouth was wrong. It was pulled back into a wide, impossibly wide smile. A predator's smile. The teeth looked too long, too sharp. The eyes reflected in the glass were not my eyes. They were black pits. And they were staring directly at me from out of the mirror. The reflection's head was tilted slightly, as if studying a curious insect. It stood there in the mirror, wearing my face, and it smiled. I stopped breathing. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor, its light now pointing uselessly at the ceiling. The room was plunged back into darkness. But I had seen it. I had seen the face in the mirror. And I knew I wasn't alone in the room. The drive back from the motel was a smear of blurry headlights and the low hum of tires on wet asphalt. I didn't remember making a conscious decision to leave the Starlight Inn. One moment I was staring into the dark where the mirror had been, my phone a dead weight on the floor. The next, I was in my car, keys in the ignition, the red neon pulse of the sign shrinking in my rearview mirror. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white mountains on a pale map. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence was a presence, a passenger in the seat next to me. My apartment felt colder than I remembered. I double-bolted the door behind me, the sound of the metal pins sliding into place echoing in the small entryway. I leaned my back against the wood, listening. The building was old. I could usually hear the neighbor's television, the groaning pipes, the city's ceaseless murmur. Tonight, there was nothing, only the sound of blood rushing in my own ears. I needed proof. The thought was a single, hard point of light, in a fog of fear. Alex's voice, tired and dismissive, played in my head. Shitty wiring. Guilt eating you. I wasn't crazy. I had to prove it. To him. To myself. The 24-hour superstore was an island of harsh, fluorescent reality. Carts rattled. A PA system announced a cleanup on aisle 7. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself move through the aisles on a monitor. I found the electronics section, a wall of black and gray boxes. My eyes scanned the options. Wireless. Night vision. Motion activated. I grabbed the smallest one I could find, a black cube no bigger than my fist. I paid in cash, the bill sticking to my sweaty palm. I didn't want a paper trail. Back in my apartment, the air still felt foreign. I set the box on the coffee table and tore it open with trembling fingers. The camera was light, plastic. It felt like a toy. Instructions, a power cord, a small mounting bracket. I tossed the manual aside and plugged the camera into the wall outlet in the far corner of the living room, behind a tall, half-dead plant. From there, it had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire room, focused on the sofa where I slept. My own personal panopticon. I downloaded the required app onto my new phone, a cheap burner I'd bought with the camera. The setup process was simple. Connect to the device's local Wi-Fi. The phone searched. A network name appeared on the screen. The _observer_74B. My finger hovered over the connect button. A cold prickle moved up my spine. It was a manufacturer's name. A brand. That's all it was. A creepy, on-the-nose brand name. I forced my thumb to tap the screen. I connected it to my home Wi-Fi, created an account with a fake email, and the live feed flickered onto my screen. I was looking at my own living room, a grainy, wide-angle version of it. I saw the back of my own head as I hunched over the phone. I waved a hand. On the screen, the tiny figure of me waved back a half-second later. It was working. I turned off the phone's screen and set the device on the kitchen counter, face down. I left the camera running. I didn't try to sleep for a long time. I sat on the floor, my back against the locked front door, watching the small, almost invisible red light on the camera's face. It was a single, unblinking eye. It saw everything. Let it see what happened. Let it be my witness. Eventually, exhaustion won. It was a physical force, pulling my eyelids down, making my limbs feel like lead. I crawled onto the sofa, pulled a thin blanket over myself, and fell into a shallow, dreamless state that wasn't quite sleep. I woke with a jolt. The room was washed in the gray light of early morning. For a moment, I forgot. Then the memory of the camera came rushing back. I scrambled off the sofa, my heart hammering a fast, uneven rhythm against my chest. I snatched the phone from the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking again. I opened the app. The feed was live, the sofa was empty, the blanket crumpled. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. I navigated to the Recordings tab. The app displayed the footage in a timeline, a long blue bar representing the hours it had been active. I started to scrub through it, my thumb dragging the playback marker across the screen. The footage was sped up, a jerky, fast-motion film of me sleeping. I watched myself toss, turn, fling an arm over my face. It was hours of nothing. Alex was right. I was losing my mind over nothing. Then I saw it. A break in the blue bar. A gap. I dragged the marker back. The timestamp at the bottom of the screen read 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 59 seconds a.m. In the video, I was on my side, perfectly still. My thumb nudged the marker forward a millimeter. The timestamp jumped to 3 hours, 45 minutes, and 1 second a.m. 30 minutes and 2 seconds. Gone. Vanished from the recording. And the image on the screen was different. I wasn't on my side anymore. I was sitting bolt upright on the edge of the sofa, my back to the camera, staring at the blank television screen across the room. I looked like a man who had just woken from a nightmare. My posture was rigid, my shoulders tense. 30 minutes. Wiped clean. No, I whispered to the empty room. No, no, no. I stabbed at the play button, watching the moments before the gap. Me, sleeping, still. Then, nothing. The video jumped. Me, sitting up, awake. I played it again. And again. The jump was seamless. No error message. No corrupted file warning. Just a clean excision of time. My mind raced. A power surge? Did the camera reboot? But the router was on a different circuit. My phone, plugged in on the counter, was still at full charge. It made no sense. I dragged the playback marker to the exact point of the jump, right at 3:15 a.m. I pinched the screen, zooming in as far as the app would allow, trying to see the final frame before the blackout. The image quality degraded, dissolving into a mess of pixels. I did the same for the first frame after the gap, at 3:45 a.m. More pixelated noise. I scrubbed back and forth over the break, a frantic, repetitive motion. The image flickered and tore at the edges of the gap, the video processor struggling to handle the corrupted data. For a single frame, less than a blink. As the marker passed over the gap, the image glitched. The video feed fractured into horizontal lines of static. And in the middle of that static, my sleeping form on the sofa was momentarily replaced by something else. It was me, but it wasn't. The body was in the same position, lying on its side. But the head was turned, facing directly into the camera lens. The face. It was horribly distorted. My face. Stretched. The mouth was pulled back into a grotesque smile, a black crescent that split the lower half of the face. The eyes were just dark patches devoid of any light or reflection. It was a mask of predatory glee, a silent, screaming laugh aimed directly at the lens. At me. Then it was gone. The frame passed. The video jumped to me sitting on the edge of the couch, awake and terrified. A sound escaped my throat, a strangled gasp. I threw the phone. It skittered across the wood floor, the screen cracking in a spiderweb pattern. I scrambled backwards, away from it, my back hitting the kitchen cabinets with a hard thud. My eyes were fixed on the corner of the living room, on the small black cube hidden behind the plant. The little red light was off, but it had seen, it had recorded it. Or had it? Had it caused it? The idea bloomed in my mind, a toxic flower. It could manipulate things. Electronics. The phone call. The TV in the motel. The camera. It was a trick. It was showing me things that weren't real. It was manufacturing evidence to drive me insane. I was being watched. Not by a ghost. Not by some spirit. By a thing that knew how to use my own technology against me. The camera in the corner was not my witness. It was its eye. I pushed myself to my feet and lurched towards the bathroom, my legs unsteady. I slammed the door, my hand fumbling for the lock. The bolt slid home with a heavy clack. I backed away from the door until I hit the cold porcelain of the bathtub and slid down to the floor, pulling my knees up to my chest. I sat there in the small, windowless room, wrapped in a silence that felt different. This wasn't an absence of sound. It was the sound of listening. I was a mouse in a box, and the cat was just outside, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes. An hour. Time had lost its meaning. The adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. I had to get out. Not just out of the bathroom, but out of the apartment. Out of the city. I needed to run until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Slowly, I got to my feet. My muscles ached. I reached for the doorknob, my palm slick with sweat. I turned it with practiced quietness. I pulled the door open a crack and peered out. The apartment was still. Morning light streamed through the dirty windows. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams. Everything looked normal, mundane. My gaze went to the corner. The camera was still there, a black speck in the shadows of the plant. The red recording light was definitely off. It wasn't watching anymore. Or it wanted me to think it wasn't. I took a cautious step out of the bathroom, my bare feet silent on the floorboards. My eyes swept the room. The cracked phone on the floor, the crumpled blanket on the sofa, the coffee table. On the coffee table was my notebook, a cheap spiral-bound one I used for grocery lists and random thoughts. It was open. I froze. I never left it open. Never. I always closed it and put a pen on top. It was a small, meaningless habit, but a consistent one. It was open to a fresh blank page. My breath caught in my throat. I took one step, then another, my movements stiff and robotic. I leaned over the table, my eyes locked on the page. There was writing on it, a single line, scrawled in the center of the page in thick, black ink. The letters were shaky, dug deep into the paper. "You don't need the camera. I'm always here." I stared at the words, the blood draining from my face. The terror was a physical thing, a block of ice forming in my stomach. But another feeling was creeping in underneath it, a sick, disorienting sense of familiarity. I looked closer at the looping Y, at the way the T was crossed, with a slight upward tilt. At the aggressive downward stroke of the final period, I knew that handwriting. It was mine. The words on the page did not move. My own handwriting. The aggressive downward slash of the period at the end of the sentence was a final, brutal punctuation to my sanity. I stared, unable to process the loop of the Y, the cross of the T. It was mine. I knew it like I knew the scar on my own palm. My hand, the one that must have written it, was trembling by my side, a stranger to me. My legs were locked. My throat was a desert. A metallic scrape at the front door. A key sliding into the lock. The sound shot through me, a jolt of electricity. I didn't move. My eyes were glued to the notebook on the table. The lock turned with a familiar series of clicks. The door swung inward. "Leo?" Anna's voice. It felt like it was coming from a great distance, through water. She stepped inside, a bag of groceries in one arm, her keys dangling from her other hand. Her face, framed by dark hair damp from the morning mist, was etched with concern. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the crumpled blanket on the sofa, the cracked phone on the floor, and then me. I was standing like a statue in the middle of the room, my back to her, staring down at the coffee table. "Leo, my God, I've been calling you all morning. Your phone went straight to voicemail." She set the groceries on the kitchen counter with a soft thud. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't answer. I couldn't turn around. If I looked at her, this would all become real. She came up behind me, her presence a small warmth in the cold air of the apartment. She followed my gaze down to the notebook. I heard her sharp intake of breath. "What is that?" she asked, her voice low. My own voice came out as a dry rasp. "I didn't write it." She was quiet for a moment. I could feel her studying me. Studying the page. She moved past me and carefully closed the notebook, her fingers avoiding the page with the writing as if it were contaminated. She placed the pen back on top of it, a small, kind gesture to restore order where there was none. "Okay," she said, her tone deliberately calm, the way you'd speak to a spooked animal. "Okay, let's clean up a little." She moved through the room with a practiced efficiency, picking up the discarded camera box, folding the blanket I'd thrown on the floor. Her movements were a small, normal dance in the middle of my wreckage. I watched her, a detached observer. She crouched to pick up a magazine that had fallen, and her hand brushed against something under the sofa's edge. She paused, then reached under and pulled it out. A kitchen knife. The big one, for chopping vegetables. It lay flat and heavy in her palm. the blade catching the morning light. She stood up slowly, her eyes on the knife, then on me. There was no accusation in her face, only a deep, swimming confusion. Leo, why was this here? I looked at the knife. I looked at the spot on the floor where it had been hiding. My mind was a blank wall. The weight of it in her hand seemed immense, dangerous. I had no memory of taking it from the butcher block in the kitchen. No memory of it at all. I don't know, I said. The words tasted like ash. She held my gaze for a second longer before walking into the kitchen and sliding the knife back into its slot with a definitive wooden clatter. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. Anna came back and stood in front of me. She put her hands on my shoulders, her grip firm. Leo, look at me. I forced my eyes to meet hers. You're not well. You haven't been right since, for a while. I think you need to talk to someone. A doctor. The word doctor hung in the air, a clinical, sterile word that didn't fit the crawling dread under my skin. A doctor couldn't explain the note, couldn't explain the camera glitch, couldn't explain the knife. He would give me pills. He would tell me I was tired, stressed, grieving. As she spoke, her gaze flickered down to my chest. Her expression shifted again. The confusion returned, sharper this time. Her hands fell from my shoulders. What is that? She whispered. I looked down. Lying against the gray fabric of my t-shirt was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. It was tarnished, the surface dull except for a small etched flower on its face. I reached up and my fingers touched the cool metal. A shock, small and sharp, went through my fingertip. I didn't recognize it. I never wore jewelry. Where did you get that, Leo? Anna's voice was barely audible. Her face had gone pale. I don't. I fumbled with the clasp at the back of my neck. It was small and intricate. I couldn't remember putting it on. I couldn't remember ever seeing it before. But my hands knew it. The way my thumb and forefinger went to the tiny latch felt practiced, familiar. It was the locket, the one from the newspaper photograph. The one the little girl was wearing in her school picture, the photo that ran next to the article about the roadside accident, the article they printed my name in. A piece of evidence. A souvenir. My stomach turned over, a wet, heavy lurch. Why was I wearing it? Hey, Jules. I have to go to the bathroom, Anna said abruptly. Her eyes darted from the locket to my face and then away to the hallway. She wasn't asking for permission. She was escaping. She turned and walked quickly down the short hall, her footsteps quick on the wood floor. I heard the bathroom door open, then close. The lock clicked into place. I stood alone in the living room, my hand still clutching the silver locket. The metal was growing warm from my touch. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen of the television, a distorted, hunched figure. Click. The sound was soft, but absolute. The lamp in the corner went out. The digital clock on the cable box vanished. The sliver of light from the kitchen window was consumed. The apartment plunged into a deep, disorienting darkness. It wasn't a power outage. It was a switch being flipped. A deliberate act. I held my breath. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. In the blackness, every sound was magnified. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant moan of traffic, and the sound of my own breathing. Except it wasn't just mine. There was another sound. A low, guttural vibration. It took me a second to realize it was coming from my own chest. A rumble. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was something else. Footsteps. My feet. They took a step toward the hallway. Then another. The movements were heavy, deliberate. Not my own. I was a passenger in my own body, watching my legs carry me toward the bathroom door. I stopped just outside it. The cheap wood of the door was a pale rectangle in the gloom. A whisper slithered out of my throat. The voice was mine. But it was pitched lower, rougher. It was coated in something ugly. Did you think you could just lock me out, Anna? I heard a small, sharp gasp from inside the bathroom. My hand, my own hand, rose and placed its palm flat against the door. I could feel the thin wood vibrate with her frantic movements on the other side. He can't help you, the voice rumbled from my lips, a secret being shared with the door. He's weak. He just wants to forget. But I remember everything. I remember the sound it made. The way the metal bent. Leo? Her voice was a thin, trembling thread through the wood. Leo, stop it. This isn't funny. A laugh erupted from my chest. It was a horrible, joyless sound. He's not here right now. My other hand clenched into a fist. I felt the knuckles grind together. I felt the muscles in my arm and shoulder tense, coiling like a spring. I was watching it happen from a great, helpless distance. Leo, please, she shrieked from within. Watch AM. My fist connected with the door. The impact shuddered through my entire arm. Wood splintered. A cracking sound echoed in the hallway. From inside, Anna screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure terror. Wavu! Another blow higher up, near the knob. The door buckled inward, a long crack appearing in the center panel. I could hear her sobbing now, her cries punctuated by the thud of her own body hitting the door from the other side, trying to hold it shut. The smell of raw, splintered pine filled the air. My knuckles were on fire. I didn't care. I'm always here, the voice growled, a counterpoint to her screams. Right here. Crack. I drew my foot back and kicked. The sole of my shoe hit the door with incredible force. The wood gave way with a screech of tearing fibers and tortured metal. The lock plate ripped free from the frame. The door flew inward. And then, silence. A sharp, white pain exploded behind my eyes. It was like a circuit breaker resetting in my skull. My body convulsed. A strangled cry tore from my throat, a sound of agony. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the hallway floor, the rough wood scraping my cheek. The lights flickered on. All of them. The world returned in a blast of harsh yellow light. My head throbbed. A thick fog filled my mind. I was on the floor. Why was I on the floor? My knuckles were raw, bleeding. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. I was dizzy. Confused. The bathroom door was hanging open, shattered and broken on one hinge. Anna. I scrambled to my feet. Anna. She was huddled in the far corner, by the tub, as far from the door as she could get. She was trying to make herself small, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her body was shaking. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, blown out with a horror so profound it seemed to hollow out her face. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees again. Anna. Oh God, are you okay? What happened? The lights went out, I heard. She flinched as I took a step toward her. She scrambled backward, the sound of her jeans scraping against the porcelain of the tub. She raised a hand, not to defend herself, but to point. Her finger trembled in the air, aimed directly at my face. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, choked sound came out. She tried again, her voice a raw, broken whisper, stripped of everything but terror. You, she breathed. It was you. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as fragments of glass. It was you. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was a statue of meat and bone, my joints locked. Anna's face was a white mask. In the harsh light of the bathroom, her eyes were black holes. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking through me, at something horrible standing in my place. Her breath came in shallow, bird-like pants. She pushed herself along the wall, her jeans making a scraping sound against the cheap tile. She kept her eyes on me, her movements slow, deliberate, the way you move when you are in a cage with a sleeping predator. Her hand fumbled behind her, found the doorknob. She didn't turn back. She pulled the door, what was left of it, closed as much as she could. Then I heard her feet, quick and stumbling, down the hall. The sound of the front door swinging open. A pause. Then, it slammed shut with a noise that shook the walls. The deadbolt slid home with a loud final click. A sound that said, you stay in, I get out. Silence. The apartment was still. The only sound was a faint, high-pitched ringing in my ears. I looked from the empty doorway to my own hand. My knuckles were split and smeared with blood. Small slivers of wood were embedded in the skin. A deep, aching throb pulsed up my arm, in time with my own heart. I didn't remember the pain starting. It was just there. A fact. I took a step, my legs unsteady. I braced myself against the wall of the hallway, my cheek pressed against the cool, painted surface. I looked back into the bathroom. The door hung from a single, tortured hinge. The frame around the lock was a ruin of splintered pine. I saw the dent in the wood where my fist had connected. Then the other one, the gaping hole near the bottom where my foot had gone through. My mind was a screen of white noise, a television tuned to a dead channel. These were the results of actions I could not recall performing. It was like waking up at the scene of a car crash, holding the steering wheel, with no memory of the impact. I walked into the living room. The air was cold. The world outside the window was gray and indifferent. My gaze drifted across the floor, the crumpled blanket, the discarded camera box, and then something else. A rectangle of black and silver, lying near the leg of the sofa. Her phone. She had dropped it. I bent down, my knees cracking. My fingers closed around the smooth, cool object. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of fine lines branching out from a point of impact near the top. I pressed the button on the side. The screen flickered to life beneath the cracks, showing her face. A picture of her and a friend, laughing on a beach somewhere, a world away from here. My thumb hovered over the phone icon. Call her. I should call her. Explain. But what would I say? I don't know what happened. I blacked out. Words. They were useless. They couldn't patch the hole in the bathroom door or erase the look in her eyes. I lowered the phone. The call wouldn't connect to her. Not really. It would connect to her terror. My thumb moved, swiping the screen open. She didn't use a passcode. She always said she had nothing to hide. I opened her photo gallery. I don't know what I was looking for. A reason. A clue. An anchor. My fingers scrolled past pictures of us, of her friends, of food, of sunsets, normal life. It felt like looking at evidence from someone else's existence. Then I saw it. It was the last file in the gallery, recorded just minutes ago. A video. The thumbnail was just a black square. It was 27 seconds long. Maybe she'd hit record by accident in her panic, in the bathroom. My finger hesitated over the play button. A cold dread seeped into my gut. This was a box I did not want to open. But I had to. I had to see. I pressed it. The screen stayed black. It was a pocket recording. But the audio was perfectly clear. First, a sound of frantic shuffling. The rasp of denim against porcelain. Her own panicked breathing, sharp and wet. Then, a sound from outside the recording, from outside the bathroom. A fist hitting wood. Wham! The sound was deep, impactful. I felt a phantom vibration in my own arm. On the recording, Anna let out a small, choked scream. Then came the voice. It was my voice. But it had been dragged through gravel and soaked in something vile. A low, conversational rumble. Did you think you could just lock me out, Anna? My blood ran cold. I was listening to a monster that sounded like me. On the recording, her voice was a thin, trembling thread. Leo? Leo, stop it. This isn't funny. Wham! Another blow, louder this time. The sound of wood splintering. It was followed by a laugh. A dry, humorless sound that came from deep in the chest of the man outside her door. My chest. He's not here right now. Crack. A final, percussive kick. The screech of tearing wood and metal. Anna's full-throated scream of pure, absolute horror. The recording ended. Silence returned to the apartment. I stood there, holding the phone. The cracked screen reflected my own face, pale and stunned. I played it again. And a third time. The sounds didn't change. The evidence was absolute. It was documented. Real. That was me. That thing on the other side of the door was me. A wave of nausea hit me. I leaned over, bracing my hands on my knees, breathing hard. Was I losing my mind? Was this what it felt like? A fracture in the self, a dark twin taking the controls while I was locked away somewhere in the back of my own skull, blind and deaf. I had to know more. This couldn't be the beginning. It felt like an ending. My eyes scanned the apartment, no longer looking for a presence, but for an absence. For gaps. For things I couldn't explain. I started in the kitchen. Knives in the block, plates in the cupboard. Normal. The bedroom. Clothes on the floor. Unmade bed. Normal. I was searching with a frantic energy, pulling open drawers, looking under the bed. My hands were shaking. I was looking for his tracks. The other one. The one who spoke on the phone. My fingers brushed against something under the bed, far back against the wall. A cardboard box. A shoebox. I didn't remember putting a shoebox there. It was coated in a thick layer of dust, as if it had been there for a long, long time. I dragged it out. It was heavy. I sat on the floor, my heart a frantic hammer against my ribs. I pulled off the lid. The first things I saw were familiar. A stack of newspaper clippings, yellowed at the edges. All about the accident. My name was circled in red ink on one of them. A photo of the wrecked car. Underneath them, the small, silver locket I had found myself wearing. It felt like an artifact from a different life. A life where I was just a man with a mistake. Not this. But there was more. Underneath the clippings, there were other things. Things that were not mine. My hand hovered over them, afraid to touch them. A woman's wallet, made of cheap, cracked vinyl. A men's watch with a scratched crystal and a broken leather strap. A cheap, silver-plated bracelet with a heart charm. A single earring, a small pearl stud. Trophies. The word appeared in my mind, unbidden and ugly. My hand, seemingly with its own will, reached in and picked up the wallet. It felt strange in my hand. Too light. Too small. I opened it. A driver's license was tucked into the clear plastic sleeve. The picture was of a woman with tired eyes and a forced smile. Sarah Kendall. A name I recognized. She worked in accounting? She quit a few weeks ago. The office rumor was that she had moved suddenly. Said someone was watching her house. Said someone had gotten inside. She told HR she was being stalked. She sounded crazy. Everyone said so. I stared at her picture. I remembered her. I remembered seeing her in the break room. She always looked over her shoulder. Always seemed jumpy. My gaze fell back into the box. To the collection of objects. Who was I? Was I a collector? A predator? My mind recoiled from the idea. It felt impossible. Alien. But the proof was in the box. The proof was on the phone. A flash. Not a thought, but an image, seared onto the inside of my eyelids. The back of Sarah Kendall's head, her dark hair tied up in a bun. I'm standing behind her. In a line at the grocery store. I can smell her perfume. Another flash. Looking through a window. Her window. She's watching television, her face illuminated by the flickering blue light. I'm in the bushes outside. The leaves are wet. The air is cold. No. No. That wasn't me. It couldn't be. Those weren't my memories. They felt like scenes from a movie I'd been forced to watch. I was the audience, not the actor. My hands dove back into the box, searching, desperate for something to disprove this. My fingers closed around something hard and metallic at the bottom. I pulled it out. A set of keys. They were held together by a cheap ring. There were two of them. A brass one for a deadbolt, and a smaller silver one. But it was the keychain I recognized. A small, plastic dolphin, faded and tacky. It was a souvenir from Florida. I knew these keys. They belonged to Mrs. Gable, the old woman in 2B, the one who lived next door. She had shown me the dolphin keychain once, told me her son sent it to her. She complained to the landlord last week. About me. She said she heard noises, scratching at her door late at night, crying. I told the landlord she was old, confused. He believed me. A new memory bloomed in the darkness of my mind. It was sharp and clear, and it was mine. I am standing in the hallway. It is late. The only light is the dim, orange emergency light at the far end. I am holding her keys. My keys. I slide the brass key into her lock. Silently. It turns. The lock clicks open with a soft, satisfying snick. My hand is on the doorknob. The crying sound she heard wasn't me in my apartment. It was me, outside her door. A low, pathetic, whimpering sound I was making in the back of my throat. The sound of an animal wanting to be let in. The scratching wasn't a ghost. It was my fingernails, scraping softly against the wood of her door, back and forth, back and forth. Testing. Waiting. I dropped the keys. They hit the wooden floor with a clatter that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. I scrambled backward, away from the box, away from the things inside it. I pressed my back against the leg of the bed, my eyes fixed on the evidence of my other life. The wallet, the watch, the keys, the person who punched through the bathroom door, the person who stood outside Sarah Kendall's window, the person who slid a key into Mrs. Gable's lock. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a demon. He was in the room. He was me. The keys lay on the floorboards, a small pile of metal and cheap plastic. They seemed to hum with a life of their own. I stared at them. The clatter they made when I dropped them was still echoing in the bones of my skull. It was the only sound in the universe. A sound that had broken something. A seal. A thin membrane between the man I thought I was and the thing that used my hands when I wasn't looking, My back was pressed hard against the bed frame, the wood digging into my spine. I couldn't get far enough away from the box. It sat in the middle of the floor. A mundane cardboard container filled with the wreckage of other people's lives. Sarah Kendall's wallet. That broken watch. Mrs. Gable's keys. Trophies. Proof. My own breathing was a loud, ragged noise in the quiet room. In. Out. A machine I couldn't control. I traced the memory again. The one that had bloomed in my head like a black flower. Me. In the hallway. The feel of the cold brass key in my fingers. The soft, oiled sound of the lock turning. My fingernails on her door. Scrape. Scrape. The low, whimpering sound in my own throat. I remembered it now. I remembered the want. The terrible, crawling need to get inside. I remembered the disappointment when I pulled the key back out and returned to my own apartment. A test. Just a test. This time, a sharp, sudden sound cut through the air. Knock. 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 It came from the front door. Loud. Firm. Official. My entire body seized. Every muscle went rigid. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Maybe if I was still enough, the sound would go away. The person would go away. The world would go away. Knock. 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 Louder this time. More insistent. It was real. It wasn't in my head. My legs scrambled for purchase, my hands pushing against the floor. I moved with a clumsy, panicked haste, shoving the shoebox with my foot. It scraped across the wood, leaving a faint line in the dust before it disappeared under the bed. I kicked the keys. They slid under with it, the dolphin keychain making one last, silent pirouette. Out of sight. I stumbled to my feet. My body felt disconnected, a puppet with tangled strings. I moved down the short hallway toward the door. Each step was a deliberate effort. My hand was shaking as I reached for the peephole. I pressed my eye against the cold metal. Blue. The dark blue of a uniform. 2 of them. I could see the shoulder patch on one. A gold starburst. Their faces were distorted by the fisheye lens. Their features swollen and grotesque. One was older, with graying hair and a tired set to his mouth. The other was younger, looking around the hallway as if he was bored. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Think. I had to think. What do I say? What do I do? My mind was a blank wall of static. The older one spoke, his voice muffled by the thick wood of the door. Mr. Reed. Leo Reed? We know you're in there. This is Officer Miller. We'd just like to ask you a few questions. They knew my name. The sound of it from a stranger's mouth sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Calm. I had to look calm. I took a breath that did nothing to settle the chaos in my chest. I wiped my sweaty palm on my jeans. My hand closed around the deadbolt. It turned with a heavy, loud click. I pulled the door open a few inches, leaving the chain on. Yes? My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat. Can I help you? The older Officer Miller had placid, patient eyes. He looked at me, his gaze neutral. Good evening, sir. Sorry to bother you so late. My name is Officer Miller. This is Officer Davis. We're just following up on a report. Could you tell us where you were on Tuesday evening? Tuesday. The word hung there. The night Anna came over. The night she left screaming. The night I punched a hole in a door and didn't remember it. My mind raced, searching for an answer that wasn't the truth. Tuesday? I made my voice sound thoughtful. Confused. I was here. Just a quiet night in. Watched a movie, I think. Why? The lie slid out easily. Too easily. It felt like someone else was speaking. Someone practiced. Officer Miller didn't blink. His patient eyes stayed locked on mine. He nodded slowly, as if considering my answer. The silence stretched. The younger officer shifted his weight. That's odd, Miller said finally. His voice was still level, still calm. but the placid look in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something harder. "Because a Miss Anna Vance filed a report this morning. She stated she was here with you on Tuesday night. She stated that you attacked her, that she had to lock herself in the bathroom before she could escape." The air left my lungs in a rush. The hallway seemed to tilt. His words weren't an accusation. They were a statement of fact. A hammer striking a nail. My carefully constructed lie fell to pieces in the space of a heartbeat. My face felt cold. I could feel the blood draining from it. The lie wasn't a shield. It was a flag. A red flag that said guilty. That's not what happened, I stammered. The words were weak, useless. The denial of a cornered animal. "Is that so?" Miller's voice was still quiet, but it carried a new weight. A new edge. "Well, that's not the only reason we're here, Mr. Reed. We're also conducting a wellness check on one of your neighbors." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A Mrs. Gable in apartment 2B. Have you seen her in the last couple of days?" "Mrs. Gable." 2B. The name and number echoed in my head, colliding with the image of the keys. The dolphin keychain. The memory of my fingernails on her door. My mouth was dry. I shook my head. A small, jerky movement. The chain rattled against the door. "No," I managed to say. "No, I haven't." Miller's gaze flickered from my face down into the apartment, through the narrow gap in the door. His eyes moved, scanning what little he could see. The floor of the entryway. The edge of the living room. Then they stopped. They narrowed. He was looking at the floor. "Sir," he said, his eyes still fixed on something past my feet, "we have reason to believe Mrs. Gable may be in danger. Her family hasn't heard from her in 48 hours. She missed a doctor's appointment. She also made a complaint last week. About you. Said she heard noises." My blood ran cold. The scratches. The crying. It wasn't just a memory. It was a report. Evidence. "I was just wondering," Miller continued, his gaze lifting slowly back to my face. His eyes were like chips of stone. "Could you tell me what made that long scratch mark on your floor? The one that runs from your front door, right over to your bedroom." I didn't have to look. I knew what he was talking about. The mark the shoebox had made when I'd shoved it. A straight line. A trail. A path leading from the scene of the crime directly to the evidence. My carefully constructed world was collapsing. The floor beneath my feet felt like sand. The other one, the one who collected trophies, he hadn't just been careless. He had been arrogant. He left tracks. He wanted to be found. Or maybe he wanted me to be found. "Could you open the door, Mr. Reed?" Officer Miller's voice was no longer a request. It was a command, wrapped in a thin layer of politeness. "We'd like to have a look inside. Just to clear things up." Clear things up. The phrase was a mockery. They weren't here to clear things up. They were here to find what was under my bed. To find the things that proved I wasn't Leo Reed, the man with a tragic past. They were here to find him. The other one. The collector. The thing that scratched at old women's doors. My hand was still on the door. My knuckles were white. The two officers stood there, waiting. Their presence filled the entire world. There was no escape. There were no more lies to tell. The game was over. He had lost. I had lost. Something inside me broke. A wire snapped. The part of me that was trying to pretend, trying to survive, just stopped. There was no thought, no plan. There was only a single decisive action. Slam. I threw my entire body weight into it. The door crashed shut, the chain snapping with a sharp crack of metal. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy but fast. It slid home with a solid final thud. "Police! Open the door!" The shout from the other side was immediate, explosive. Boom! A heavy impact shuddered through the wood, a shoulder hitting the door, hard. "Leo Reed, you are under arrest! Open this door now!" Boom! The doorframe groaned. A thin crack appeared in the paint near the lock. They were coming in. They were going to find the box. They were going to find me. I backed away from the door. My feet carried me, not toward the back window, not toward a hiding place, but toward the kitchen. The sounds of the assault on the door became the rhythm of my steps. Boom. A step. Boom. Another step. My hand reached for the utensil drawer. I pulled it open. The noise of forks and spoons rattling together was deafening in the small space. My fingers bypassed the dull handles of the butter knives, searching for something else. My hand closed around a wooden handle. It felt solid. Correct. I pulled it out. The blade of the chef's knife was 8 inches long, its edge gleaming under the dim kitchen light. Crack. A louder sound from the front door. The splintering of wood. They were almost through. I stood in the center of the living room, halfway between the kitchen and the wreckage of the front door. I held the knife. My hand was surprisingly steady. The terror was gone, replaced by a strange, hollow clarity. I wasn't going to run. Where would I run to? I couldn't run from my own hands. I couldn't escape my own head. There was only one thing left to do. Only one way to stop him. Crash. The door flew inward, torn from its hinges, and slammed against the hallway wall. The 2 officers spilled into the room, guns drawn, moving with practiced speed. Police! Drop the... They stopped. They saw me. They saw the knife in my hand. Their bodies tensed, their guns leveled at my chest. I could see their fingers tight on the triggers. Their faces were masks of grim focus. But I didn't move toward them. I didn't raise the knife to attack. Slowly, deliberately, I turned the blade around. My other hand came up to steady it. I raised the knife, not to them, but to myself. The tip came to rest against the side of my own neck, the point pressing into my skin, cold and sharp. An inch from my carotid artery. I looked at them. At their wide, shocked eyes. At their guns. The hollow clarity inside me was absolute. This was the only end. The only way to make it stop. To make him stop. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, blurring their blue uniforms. They were the first tears I had shed through all of this. Not for myself. For Anna. For Mrs. Gable. For the man I was supposed to have been. My voice was a whisper, a thread of sound in the wrecked apartment. Please, kill it. The sound was gone. The shouts, the splintering wood, the pounding in my own ears. All replaced by a low hum. Fluorescent lights. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I was sitting. My arms were pulled forward, tethered to something. I looked down. My wrists were circled by steel. The cuffs were linked by a short chain and bolted to a ring in the center of a metal table. The table was cold against my forearms. I was in a small room. Gray walls. Gray floor. One wall was a large, dark pane of glass. I knew what it was. I'd seen rooms like this in movies. The hum of the lights was the only sound. It vibrated in my teeth. I sat perfectly still. I did not test the cuffs. I did not look around for a clock. Time didn't matter in here. I lowered my head until my forehead was inches from the table's surface. The polished steel acted as a dark, warped mirror. I saw a face. Mine. The features were stretched and distorted. Puffy eyes. A smear of dirt on one cheek. The face of a cornered animal. I kept watching it. Kept breathing. In. Out. The only thing I could control. Then I saw it. In the reflection. The man in the steel pulled his lips back. It wasn't a smile. It was a display of teeth. A silent, predatory gesture. My own face remained slack, my mouth closed. I blinked. The reflection blinked with me, but the bared teeth remained for a fraction of a second longer. A ghostly afterimage of a threat. I lifted my head quickly, my heart a hard fist in my chest. I stared at the door. I did not want to look at the table again. The door opened with a soft click. It wasn't Miller or Davis. A woman stepped inside. She was maybe in her 50s, with neat gray hair and glasses. She wore a blazer, not a uniform. She carried a thin file folder. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound loud in the small space. She pulled the other chair out, its legs scraping against the floor, and sat down opposite me. She placed the folder on the table but didn't open it. She didn't speak. She just looked at me. Her gaze wasn't accusatory like the cops. It was clinical, like she was looking at a specimen under glass. The silence stretched. The humming of the lights grew louder. I focused on the way the cuffs bit into my skin. A dull, constant pressure. "Leo," she said. Her voice was level, calm. "My name is Dr. Eris. I'm a psychologist. I'm not here to talk about Mrs. Gable. Or Anna Vance. I didn't react. I kept my eyes fixed on a point on the wall just over her shoulder. I'm here to talk about the accident, she continued. The one on the interstate. 4 years ago. The air in my lungs turned to ice. My hands cuffed to the table clenched into fists. I could feel the ridge of my knuckles pressing against the cold steel. The interstate. The rain. The squeal of tires. The shattering sound that wasn't just glass. A memory I spent every day trying to bury. It all starts there, doesn't it, Leo? Her voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. You walked away. She didn't. And you could never forgive yourself for that. You survived. You felt you should have been punished. But no one did. The courts called it a tragic accident. No fault, no penalty. So you needed someone else to do the punishing. My breathing hitched. An involuntary gasp. Dr. Eris leaned forward slightly. You needed someone to deliver the punishment you thought you deserved. When the world wouldn't give you a monster, you made one. You created him. A new voice spoke. It wasn't hers. It was inside my own head. It was deep and steady, a low rumble beneath the hum of the lights. She's right, you know. I flinched, my eyes darting to the dark glass. Who was that? Clysis. This part of you, the doctor went on, her eyes not leaving my face. This Punisher. At first he only hurt you, didn't he? The sleepless nights. The feeling of being watched. The things you'd find moved in your apartment. You thought you were going crazy. But you weren't. He was just doing his job. Gaslighting you, making you feel unsafe in your own home. The punishment you thought you deserved. My mind raced. The open cupboards. The single spoon on the floor. The front door left unlocked. It wasn't my carelessness. It was my work. The voice inside me said. It had a tone of satisfaction. Careful. Precise. I deny it. I whispered, the words coming out cracked and thin. I didn't know I was going to say them. Dr. Eris didn't seem surprised. Of course you do. That's your job. But his job changed. Punishing you wasn't enough for him anymore. He got bored. He started to look outside. He saw other people. People who were happy. People who had normal lives, who hadn't killed anyone in a car wreck. People who didn't deserve it. Like Anna, your coworker. Safe. Content. And he started to punish them for the crime of not being you. The voice inside me laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. She liked you. She had no idea who she was talking to. The weakness, the whining, it was an insult. A man should not be so weak. No, I said, louder this time, shaking my head. The chair legs scraped on the floor. No, I liked Anna. I would never. You wouldn't, Dr. Eris corrected. Leo Reed wouldn't, but he would. He's the one who followed her home that night, wasn't he? Just to see where she lived. He's the one who got a key made. He's the one who tested her lock. And then there's Mrs. Gable. An old woman, living alone. An easy target. All that quiet contentment in her little apartment. It must have driven him mad. He couldn't stand it. He had to spoil it. He had to possess it. You're just the storyteller, Leo, the Punisher sneered in my head. You make up the reasons. You feel the guilt. You cry. But I'm the one who acts. I'm the one who gets things done. You're the flimsy curtain. I am the hand that pulls it aside. The two voices, his and hers, were surrounding me, weaving a net. My reality was tearing at the seams. I tried to grab onto something solid. The memory of the accident. The rain. The impact. The horrifying silence afterward. That was real. My guilt was real. It wasn't me, I insisted, my voice rising. There was something in the apartment. I heard it. I saw things. What did you see, Leo? Dr. Eris asked, her voice still impossibly even. The struggle inside my head exploded. The Punisher's voice dropped its mocking tone and became a torrent of pure, undiluted memory. A film reel projected onto the inside of my skull. I don't just remember. I see it. I see my own hand, my own fingers, scraping against the plaster of my bedroom wall. Scrape. Scrape. The sound is dry and rhythmic. I am not trying to get out. I am making a sound. A sound for the woman in the next apartment to hear. I am marking my territory. I feel the thin burn as my nails wear down to the fine white dust that coats my fingertips. I am the source of the noise. The film cuts. I am in the bathroom. The mirror is fogged from a shower. My hand holds a bar of soap. I feel its waxy, slick texture. My index finger presses into it, and I begin to write. The letters are backward, clumsy. K-I-L-L-I-T. I stare at the words, not with fear, with satisfaction. I am the one leaving the messages. Another cut. Anna is here. She is laughing at something I said. A hollow, pathetic joke. I see her face change as my expression shifts. The Leo she knows is gone. My hand shoots out, not to touch her, but to slam the door she is trying to escape through. I feel the vibration jolt up my arm. I hear her scream. It is a thrilling sound. I feel the pull in my muscles as I clench my fist and punch the wooden panel of the bathroom door where she has hidden herself. I feel the sharp pain as wood splinters, as the bones in my knuckles grind together. The pain is a grounding force. It is proof of my existence. The final scene. The most vivid. I am standing outside apartment 2B. Mrs. Gable's door. It is late. The hallway is silent. In my hand, I hold her keys. The metal is cold. I remember taking them from the mail table downstairs weeks ago. Planning. The dolphin keychain feels smooth and cheap against my palm. I slide the key into her lock. It turns with a well-oiled whisper. The door opens. The air that spills out smells of mothballs and stale tea. I step inside. I am not here to steal money. I am here to take something else. A piece of her life. I walk through her small living room. I see the photographs on the mantelpiece. Grandchildren. A wedding photo. A life lived. I go to her bedroom. I see the indentation of her head on the pillow. I open her jewelry box. I don't take the pearls or the gold locket. I take the watch. A simple broken Timex. It has no value. But it is hers. It is a piece of her. A trophy. I am the collector. The visions crash over me, one after another, a tsunami of truth. I am the noise. I am the antagonist. I am the monster under the bed. I am the thing that scratches at the door. My body begins to shake. It starts in my hands and spreads up my arms. The chain on the cuffs rattles against the table. The rhythm is frantic, uncontrolled. A low noise escapes my throat, a guttural sound of an animal caught in a trap. The chair scrapes backward as my legs convulse. My head snaps back, then forward, my forehead striking the metal table with a dull, wet thud. Pain flashes behind my eyes, white and sharp. The humming of the lights dissolves into a roar. The two voices, the doctors and the punishers, vanish. There is only the chaos, the violent shuddering of a machine breaking down. The world is reduced to the rattling of the chain, the bite of the steel on my wrists, and the searing, undeniable knowledge that the devil I have been running from lives behind my own eyes. And then, it stops. The shaking ceases as abruptly as it began. The roaring in my ears fades, replaced once more by the low, steady hum of the lights. The pain in my forehead is a distant throb. Slowly, I lift my head from the table. A thin trickle of blood runs from my hairline, down past my eyebrow. I don't wipe it away. I look at Dr. Eris. Her face is a mask of professional concern, but her eyes are wide. She started to rise from her chair, but is now frozen in place. The storm inside my head is over. The frantic, terrified voice of Leo Reed is gone. Silenced. The space he occupied is now a vacuum. A profound calm settles over me. The two warring sides have finished their battle. There is only a victor. My lips part. The voice that comes out is not the weak, stammering one from before. It is deeper, clearer, completely steady. Finally, I say, quiet. The metallic click of the cuffs being unbolted from the table was the first sound to break the stillness. Dr. Eris did not do it. Two guards in drab gray uniforms had entered without a word. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a permanent scowl, pulled me to my feet. My legs felt steady. The throbbing in my forehead was a dull, rhythmic reminder of the impact, a metronome for the new quiet. I did not resist as they cuffed my hands behind my back. The metal was cold against my skin. Let's go, Reed. The thick-necked guard grunted, his hand gripping my bicep. I looked at Dr. Eris one last time. Her face was pale. The clinical mask had fractured, revealing the woman beneath. She was watching me, not a specimen, but something she had accidentally unleashed. I offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement. A thank you of sorts. She had helped me silence the screaming. She had cleared the stage. The hallway was long and painted appealing, institutional green. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in a sickly yellow sheen. Our footsteps echoed, the guard's heavy bootfalls, the scuff of my cheap canvas shoes. A door clanged shut somewhere behind us, the sound hitting the concrete walls and bouncing back, distorted. The air smelled of bleach, boiled cabbage, and old sweat. It was a clean, uncomplicated smell. It was honest. We passed another man being led in the opposite direction. He was younger than me, maybe 20. His face was blotchy and wet. He sniffled, a thick, liquid sound, and wiped his nose on the sleeve of his orange jumpsuit. He was looking at the floor, his shoulders hunched. A low whimpering sound escaped his lips, a single, desperate word. Mama. My guard shoved him lightly as they passed. Keep it moving, crybaby. I watched the boy's back as he shuffled away. I felt the corners of my mouth lift. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was one of recognition. I recognized the shape of that weakness. The whining voice. The pathetic need for comfort. It was a familiar ghost, but now it was outside of me. It was someone else's problem. The slight upward curve of my lips felt good, a muscle I had not used correctly in a long time. They processed me. The questions were flat, delivered in a monotone. Name. Age. My fingerprints were taken. My finger and thumb rolled in, thick, black ink on a card. The ink felt cool and greasy. I stared at the whirls and loops of my own identity, now officially catalogued. A mugshot was taken. The flash was a blinding white-hot punch, leaving a swimming green amoeba in my vision. Turn to the side. Flash. I complied with each command. I was a model of cooperation. I was no longer fighting the system. I was part of it. A new gear in the machine. They gave me an orange jumpsuit. The fabric was coarse against my skin. It smelled faintly of another man's body. They took my clothes, my wallet, my shoes. They took Leo Reed's things. They put them in a brown paper bag. I watched the bag get sealed and tagged. Goodbye. Finally, another guard led me down a different corridor. This one was a cell block. The noise was a layered thing here. A low murmur of voices, a sudden shout, the tinny sound of a small television, a cough that was too wet. The doors were solid steel, with a small, barred window at eye level. Faces appeared in some of them as I passed. Curious, hostile, bored. They were all just faces, shapes in a window. The guards stopped at a door marked C-17. A heavy bolt was drawn back with a loud, grating shunk. The door swung inward. In you go, he said, his voice devoid of any interest. He didn't uncuff me. Your roommate will be back from his work detail in an hour. The cuffs come off at lights out. The door slammed shut behind me. The sound was final. The bolt slid home. I was in a small concrete box. A set of metal bunks was bolted to one wall. A toilet and sink combo, a single piece of stainless steel, was bolted to the other. There was no window to the outside. A single, bare bulb, protected by a wire cage, cast a weak light. The bottom bunk was taken. A thin, lumpy mattress was covered with a gray blanket. A worn paperback with a lurid cover sat on the pillow. I took the top bunk. I had to maneuver awkwardly with my hands cuffed behind me, but I managed. I sat on the edge of the mattress. It was thin. I could feel the metal slats beneath me. I waited. Time was different here. It didn't flow. It dripped. Like a leaky faucet. Each drip was a second. An hour later, maybe more, the bolt on the door was drawn again. A man stepped in. He was big, not just tall, but wide. His neck was a column of muscle that flowed into thick shoulders. His head was shaved, and the bare scalp was covered in a spiderweb tattoo. More ink crawled up his neck and disappeared under the collar of his jumpsuit. His arms were a tapestry of skulls and snarling animals. He stopped just inside the door and looked at me. His eyes were small and dark. He took a step forward. The door shut behind him. We were alone. He looked me up and down. His gaze was heavy, a physical weight. He was measuring me. "What'd you do?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, like gravel being turned over. I didn't answer. I just watched him. I catalogued the details. The flattened bridge of his nose. The thick scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way his knuckles were swollen and misshapen. He was a creature of simple, direct violence. His body was a record of it. He took another step. "I ask you a question, Fish," he said, the rumble in his voice getting lower. "What the fuck are you in for?" I remained seated. I tilted my head slightly, a gesture of mild curiosity. I was studying the way the light from the bare bulb caught the edge of his jaw. He was a piece of the landscape now, a new texture in my world. My silence was a vacuum. He was compelled to fill it. "You deaf? Or just stupid?" He moved to the sink and turned on the tap. He slurped water directly from the faucet, noisily. He wiped his mouth with the back of his massive hand and turned back to me. "Doesn't matter. You're in my house now. You sleep when I say. You eat when I say. You shit when I say. You got it?" I blinked slowly. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. I just watched. A new kind of quiet was growing inside me. It was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of focus. Night came. The main lights in the block went out, leaving only the dim glow of the bulb in our cell. The guard came and unlocked my cuffs through the slot in the door. The metal fell away. I rubbed my wrists. The skin was red and indented. I lay on my back on the top bunk, my hands behind my head. I stared at the stained concrete ceiling inches from my face. I could hear him breathing below me. A slow, heavy sound. I could hear the rustle of his blanket. I could smell the sourness of his sweat. "Fucking hate this place," he muttered from the bunk below. "Hate the noise." I said nothing. "They put you in here with psychos. Hear that hacking? That's old man Hemmings. Dying of something. They don't care. Just let him cough his lungs out all night." He paused. "You still ain't said a goddamn word." "What? The cat got your tongue?" I waited a moment. Then I spoke. My voice was level, conversational. It sounded strange in the small space. "There was a girl," I said. He went quiet below me. He hadn't expected me to speak. "It was raining," I continued, my eyes fixed on a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a bird. 4 years ago, on the interstate. The kind of rain that's more like a solid wall of water than individual drops. You can't see anything. The wipers can't keep up. They just smear the water around. I heard the bunk below me creak as he shifted his weight. He was listening now. I was driving. She was in the passenger seat. Her name was Sarah. She was talking about something. College applications. What she wanted to be. An architect, I think. She liked the idea of making things that would outlive her. I remember the sound of her voice, and the sound of the tires on the wet asphalt. Then there was another sound, a louder one. I paused. I chose my next words with care. I was not remembering the event. I was constructing it for an audience. It was a truck. Hydroplaned across the median. There was no time to do anything. You don't brake. You don't swerve. You just sit there. I remember the feeling of the steering wheel in my hands. The cheap plastic. I remember the exact moment of impact. It's not like in the movies. It's not an explosion. It's just a single, deafening sound. A punch. The whole world becomes that one sound. And then it gets very, very specific. The creaking below had stopped. He was perfectly still. I remember the taste of blood in my mouth. My own. I bit my tongue. I remember the smell of gasoline and antifreeze, and the sound of the rain, still drumming on the roof of the car, which was now on its side. It seemed so rude, that the rain would just keep going, as if nothing had happened. I let the silence hang in the air. Then I turned my head. She wasn't talking anymore. Her eyes were open, but they weren't looking at anything. There was glass in her hair. It glittered in the light from the dashboard. Like diamonds. You feel a kind of guilt that's so big it has no sound. It's just a pressure. A weight in your chest that you know you will carry until you die. You walk away from it. She doesn't. And every day, you wake up, and the first thing you think is, I'm still here. And you hate yourself for it. I stopped talking. The story was told. It was Leo's story. It was the engine of his misery. To me, now, it was just a collection of words. A tool. The bunk below me suddenly exploded in motion. What the fuck is wrong with you? The big man hissed, his voice a choked whisper. He wasn't rumbling anymore. He was tight, strained. Who tells that kind of shit? You don't talk about that stuff in here. You don't talk about kids. It's just a story, I said softly. Shut up, he snapped. Just shut the fuck up. He was breathing fast now. I could hear it. A quick, shallow panting. I had found the crack in his foundation. He wasn't a creature of simple violence. He had rules. He had things he wouldn't touch. I had just taken one of those things and smeared it all over the inside of our cell. He swung his legs out of the bunk and stood up. He was a large shadow in the dim light. I didn't move. I'm gonna warn you one time, you little freak, he snarled, his voice trembling with a rage that felt different from before. It was unnerved. You keep your mouth shut. You don't look at me, you don't talk to me, or I will break your fucking jaw. He was trying to re-establish his territory with a threat he understood. It was a pathetic gesture. He took a step toward my bunk. He was going to hit me. To enforce his rule. To make things simple again. He reached up, his big hand grasping for the edge of my mattress. It's funny, I said, my voice still perfectly level. The guilt. For a long time I thought it needed to be punished. He froze. Then I realized, I continued, turning my head to look down at him. My eyes had adjusted to the dark. I could see his face clearly. The confusion. The dawning fear. I wasn't the one who deserved punishment. The punishment is the point. It's the work itself. The application of it. It's a craft. You just have to find the right materials. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He understood he had made a terrible mistake. He lunged. Not with a plan. With a raw animal instinct to destroy the thing that was making him feel this way. His hands clawed at my jumpsuit. My movement was faster. It was economical. The rest happened outside the frame. For anyone listening in the hallway, there would have been a flurry of sudden, sharp sounds against the backdrop of Old Man Hemmings's coughing. A grunt of effort. The wet, solid thud of a head hitting the steel toilet bowl. Not once. Twice. A short, sharp scream that was cut off with a horrifying, liquid gurgle. The sound of a heavy body slumping to the concrete floor. And then, quiet. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of a completed task. The next morning, the bolt on the door screeched open for the morning count. 2 guards stood there. They looked inside. My roommate was curled in the far corner of the cell, under the sink. He was on his side, his knees drawn up to his chest. He was shaking, a fine, continuous tremor. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. A thin line of drool trickled from the corner of his open mouth. He didn't respond when the guards called his name. I was sitting on my bunk, cross-legged. The worn paperback from his pillow was in my hands. The cover showed a cowboy shooting at a monstrous snake. I had found it on the floor. I looked up from the page as the guards stared from him to me. I closed the book, keeping my finger in place to mark my spot. I gave them a pleasant, patient smile. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice polite and clear. "Is there a library here? I seem to have finished this one already. I need to find some new stories."